Morfydd Clark is back in the news, but all for the wrong reason. So, welcome back to Views with Hughes, Gender Free News. This is Jerome Hughes. Now, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, today, Rings of Power and Morfydd Clark, along with creators and actors and executives, has not only, as we know, butchered J.R.R. Tolkien's legacy, but also has attempted to gaslight and antagonize the very fans who cherish his work for generations. Okay, now let's be clear and honest here. This isn't just about, Morfydd Clark or the show. This is about the broader assault on our culture, our heroes, and our values when we see a character like Galadriel, a character played by Morfydd Clark, but also from Tolkien, who has been a symbol of wisdom, grace, and strength, transformed into something unrecognizable by Morfydd Clark and her portrayal. It's not just a creative decision, it's an attack on everything that character represents. And when Morfydd Clark, along with all those behind the scenes, has the audacity to criticize the fans for reacting negatively to this, it's clear that they're not interested in honoring the source material or the fans who love it. Okay, they're actually in it to go ahead and not only get the money but put the ideology out there. And Morfydd Clark recently decided to promote the Rings of Power Season 2 by painting herself as the victim. In an interview with Elle, Morfydd Clark expressed, how unprepared she was for the backlash after Season 1 aired. And Morfydd Clark lamented the dark side of the social media, claiming that much of the criticism she received came from men. Now let's pause right there, okay? See, Morfydd Clark go to defense, like many others nowadays, is to label criticism as misogynistic, especially if it's coming from men, and suddenly all the legitimate concerns about Morfydd Clark's portrayal of Galadriel are brushed aside. And honestly, we haven't seen any proof of this stuff. And you see, this tactic from Morfydd Clark, also employed by Morfydd Clark and others, is nothing new, but it's particularly insidious when applied to a character like Galadriel. And Tolkien's Galadriel is a character who embodies wisdom, restraint, and the power of inner strength. And Galadriel is not a warrior charging into battle with reckless abandon. She's a leader who understands the weight of her actions and the consequences that they bring. But in the Rings of Power, we're given a version of Galadriel played by Morfydd Clark that is impulsive, prideful, and abrasive, traits that are not only out of character but also a betrayal of Tolkien's vision, as presented by Morfydd Clark. Now, Morfydd Clark went on to suggest that, some fans criticized her depiction of Galadriel because it made other people feel liberated, And Morfydd Clark also stated that Galadriel takes up space where she's unapologetic, and Morfydd Clark didn't want to portray her like a human woman who's been taught not to be abrasive. But what Morfydd Clark is essentially admitting here is that, she intentionally made Galadriel into a character that is abrasive and unlikable, all under the guise of woke empowerment. And when people didn't like this unfaithful interpretation by Morfydd Clark, she dismissed the criticism as being rooted in sexism. Now, this is a classic bait and switch tactic where they alter a beloved character beyond recognition, then claim any negative reaction is due to bigotry. Way to go for that, Morfydd Clark. Now, let's be honest here. This kind of rhetoric, especially when used by Morfydd Clark, is not only dishonest, but it's also divisive. You see, Morfydd Clark pits fans against each other, creating a false narrative that if you don't like this new version of Galadriel, you must be against strong women. But that's not the issue here. You see, the issue here is that Morfydd Clark and her portrayal of Galadriel is fundamentally at odds with who she is as a character. It's not about whether or not she's strong, it's about how that strength is expressed. And in Tolkien's works, Galadriel's strength is quiet, dignified, and deeply rooted in her wisdom and experience. Not to mention, Galadriel was there when the lights first appeared and stuff in Valinor. Okay, so that makes her one of the most powerful elves ever. Okay, and in the Rings of Power, Morfydd Clark and her strength is loud, brash, and completely disconnected from the character's true essence. And we've seen that in Season 1 as well. We're going to see that again in Season 2. But let's talk about the showrunners, particularly J.D. Payne, who tried to justify this version of Galadriel played by Morfydd Clark by invoking Tolkien himself. And Payne claimed that Tolkien hinted at Galadriel being a powerful and a warrior. Now, sure, Tolkien did depict her as a strong and wise leader, but Payne conveniently ignores that her strength came from her wisdom, her temperance, and her growth over thousands of years. And we don't see that being played through Morfydd Clark. But what the Rings of Power did with Morfydd Clark at the forefront was strip away that wisdom and temperance, leaving us with a character who is impulsive, prideful, and frankly unpleasant to be around. And this is not the Galadriel that Tolkien fans have admired for decades. And Morfydd Clark and her portrayal only exacerbates the issue itself to make it even worse. And then Payne added insult to injury by saying that they wanted to take Galadriel, played by Morfydd Clark, from being impetuous, prideful young warrior to the wise lady of the wood. But the problem is they started with the version of Galadriel that never existed in Tolkien's world. You see, they didn't honor her journey. They invented a new character and slapped the name Galadriel on her, with Morfydd Clark leading the charge, hoping that the fans wouldn't even notice, okay? But we've all noticed that. And let's be honest, we did notice, and the fans always notice when a beloved character is changed beyond recognition. Now, we're not blind to these manipulations at all, especially when, when Morfydd Clark is the one bringing them to life. You see, we understand that every character evolves, but that evolution should be in line with who that character fundamentally is, not some arbitrary decision made just to fit a modern woke agenda, as we've seen with Morfydd Clark and her portrayal. The Galadriel that we see in Rings of Power is not an evolution. It's actually a distortion, and Morfydd Clark's involvement only highlights this problem. But this isn't just about Galadriel or even Morfydd Clark. You see, Prime Video's The Rings of Power, starring Morfydd Clark, went out of its way to cast actors who look nothing like the characters that Tolkien described. Lenny Harry, Sophia Nomvet, and even Ishmael Cruz Cordova were cast as a hobbit, dwarf, and elf, and respectively, despite being or bearing no resemblance to how these races were depicted in the original works. And before anyone accuses me of being against diversity, I'm gonna make this clear. It's not about the actors themselves. It's about the intentions of the studio and their blatant agenda to warp the source materials to fit the modern ideological goals, as we've seen with Morfydd Clark and her portrayal. In other words, forcing diversity instead of making it natural. Now, diversity in storytelling is important, but it must be done with respect for the source material itself. And Tolkien's world was based on specific cultures, histories, and even mythologies. And it's not just the fantasy world, it's a carefully constructed universe with its own internal logic and consistency. Now, when you start changing, the fundamental aspects of that world to fit modern sensibilities, guess what? You're no longer telling Tolkien's story. You're telling your own story, and it's a story that the fans don't want, and you're using Tolkien's name to sell it, just as Morfydd Clark and her portrayal does. And that's dishonest right there, and it's disrespectful to both the author as well as his fans, okay? Now, Nomvet, one of the actresses, outright admitted at San Diego Comic-Con that they were trying to go ahead and redress the balance in film and television, where she said she proudly declared that this was her version of Tolkien and that they were rewriting his work to make it more accessible to modern audiences. But in other words, they're openly admitting to butchering Tolkien's lore just to serve their own woke political agenda. And this is not about staying true to the story. It's about forcing the woke narrative onto the fans, regardless of how it distorts the characters and the world that we love, as we've seen with Morfydd Clark, as well as the portrayal of Galadriel. Now, continuing on, Nomvet wasn't alone in this. Ishmael Cruz Cordova also jumped on the bandwagon, telling the Associated Press that there will no longer be a time where you can say that there was no elves of color, okay? Honestly, there were no elves of color from the original works. He framed this as a victory, as if he had vanquished some great evil by inserting modern racial politics into a fantasy world that never needed it. Now, Lenny Henry also chimed in, saying that this show is different because it's more inclusive, okay? He even mocked the fans, saying that they have no trouble believing in dragons, but can't accept a black hobbit or elf. All while Morfydd Clark remains silent on these issues, okay? Well, here's the thing, people. It's not about the actor's skin color. It's about respecting the world Tolkien created, a world that has deeply rooted in specific cultures, histories, and even mythologies. Now, when you start changing the fundamental aspects of that world, guess what? You're no longer telling Tolkien's story, like at all. You're actually telling your own story and using his name to try to push a narrative that has no place in Middle Earth. Morfydd Clark and the portrayal of Galadriel is just one of the pieces of this larger puzzle. Okay. Now, the show's creators didn't even stop right there. They didn't stop at, changing the characters and the story. They actually went further by attacking the fans who dared to criticize these changes. Now, the official Rings of Power account on X, formerly Twitter, accused Tolkien fans of being racist, okay? They posted statements of solidarity with the cast, claiming that Middle Earth was always multicultural and that BIPOC or Black Indigenous people of color characters belong in Middle Earth. I wonder if they know what BIPOC actually mean. But that's another story for another day. But this is pure gaslighting right here. And it's something that Morfydd Clark has contributed to. They're attempting to rewrite history by claiming that, any objection to the changes is rooted in racism. It's a convenient way to silence critics and deflect from the real issue, which is their complete disregard for source material, a disregard that Morfydd Clark's portrayal exemplifies. But the thing is, this is going to lead to even more lower ratings. And Morfydd Clark herself continued this narrative a few months later by posting on Instagram stories telling anyone sending hate to her Black castmates to shut up. Okay. Y'all remember that because I've put on that before. And Morfydd Clark even shared a video of her castmate Charles Edwards making the hand motion from season 1, revealing the phrase, "shut the F up." Now, Morfydd Clark then asked who made this, as if it was some clever retort, but Morfydd Clark provided no evidence of this supposed hate. Now, this was just another attempt to paint the critics as bigots and who deflect from the fact that the show was a failure. Now, with Morfydd Clark at front and center. All right. And speaking of failure, let's not forget that despite all the marketing stunts, all the attempts to silence critics and all the so-called solidarity statements, the Rings of Power season 1 didn't resonate with the audience. According to Hollywood Reporter, and they're about to go out of business soon with layoffs, 63% of people who watched part of the first episode didn't even finish the series. That's a crazy statistic, and it speaks volumes about how out of touch the creators, including Morfydd Clark, are with the fans. Okay. And only 37% finished the first season. And it's not just about the Rings of Power. This is about a broader trend we're seeing in Hollywood, where beloved characters and stories are being hijacked to serve modern political woke agendas. Now, we've seen it with Star Wars, of course, we've seen it with Marvel, and now we're also seeing it with The Lord of the Rings. And it's time to draw a line where, in the same way, say that enough is enough. Started with the likes of Morfydd Clark. Now, these stories are also part of our cultural heritage, where, these stories from Tolkien, they've been passed down through generations, inspiring millions of people around the world. They've taught us about bravery, honor, sacrifice, and even the battle between good and evil. But then when Hollywood gets its hands on them, they strip away those core values and replace them with shallow, politicized narratives shared by Morfydd Clark that do nothing but divide us, which are narratives that are now embodied by performances like the ones of Morfydd Clark. Okay. Now, honestly, we still have to stand together as fans and demand better. We have to support creators who respect the source material, unlike Morfydd Clark, and push back against those who don't, including the likes of Morfydd Clark. And we have to make our voices heard. Okay, not just online, but also with our wallets. Now, if we stop supporting these agenda-driven projects, guess what? Hollywood will have no choice but to change course. And finally, we have to remember why we fell in love with these stories in the first place. Okay. Now, it wasn't because, they were inclusive or diverse. It was because they were actually good and entertaining. They were well written, they were well acted, and they were well respected with the intelligence of the audience. And they also transported us into other worlds, made us care about the characters, and left us with a sense of wonder and even awe, something that, has been lost in the wake of the portrayals like that of Morfydd Clark. Okay. But other than that, you know what? That's what storytelling is supposed to do. It's supposed to bring us together, not tear us apart. It's supposed to uplift us, not drag us down in the name of modern woke politics. So let's continue to fight for that. Let's continue to fight for good stories, well told, that respect the legacy of the authors who came before us, and let's make sure that the performances like the ones of Morfydd Clark are seen for what they are, a departure from the true essence of the characters that we hold dear. Okay, so let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. Also, be sure to include any additional thoughts you may have this particular topic. If you enjoyed what I shared in this video, go ahead, smash the like button, share far wide across social media. And if you haven't done so already and you enjoyed all the content that I put out there, go ahead, subscribe to the channel, click the bell notification so that way you're notified of future uploads and updates. Till then, peace.